Hello again, and what is hip? And welcome to a video all about Neo Geo, and specifically Neo Geo CD. So, I just made a video the other week about my first year experiencing the Neo Geo CD as a complete newcomer. I dabbled with SNK back in the Wii days on the SNK Classics Collection, which was a giant compilation of various SNK Neo Geo games for the Wii, and fell in love with it. And a decade plus later, I finally got my first Neo Geo home system. And I know the world of SNK and Neo Geo can be kind of confusing, especially for newcomers. I know it was for me, but I just wanted to share, I guess, my experiences and my tips and tricks for really how to delve into the Neo Geo world, specifically without actually breaking the bank, or at least not as much as you would be with the actual cartridge-based system. Because I find that the Neo Geo CD is a little more confusing to just fully grasp when compared to the Neo Geo AES, which was the cartridge-based version of the Neo Geo CD. Since Neo Geo CD has so many different variants and region locking, not region locking, there's no region locking, but different differences within different regions, and it could be a lot to understand. So I want to talk about that here. So we're going to first start off with, I guess, the question, why would you get a Neo Geo CD over the Neo Geo AES? Well, to put it quite simply, if you care anything about money, then you're going to go with the Neo Geo CD. The Neo Geo AES flat out is the better system. There's no loading, and I mean, it looks really cool, but that's really the main difference between the two. Neo Geo CD is known for super long loading times, and they're quite unbearable at points compared to the Neo Geo AES, where there's no loading at all. The only difference is that a game that's $200-300+ on the Neo Geo AES, on the Neo Geo CD, it would be maybe $50, depending on the game. So there's a big savings between the two. And another thing is that the hardware is pretty much all the same. So you still have that Neo Geo arcade cabinet experience at home, since it's the same inside, just different format. Also, some of the other differences is that the Neo Geo CD games tend to have different soundtracks. Not all of them do, but a lot of them have kind of CD quality music, for better or for worse. Some people really like that. I guess the original arcade kind of music, where the Neo Geo CD, you'll have some mid-late 90s, early 2000s rock music thrown in onto some fighting games. So it's a different experience. It's all personal preference. For me, the cost savings really outweigh all of the other negatives, especially if you know how to do this in a way that kind of diminishes the unfortunate effects of loading. And another thing is, I'm going to be really focusing specifically on unmodded Neo Geo CDs. You can mod these to be not CD based, but rather play games off of an SD card, which completely gets rid of 99% of the loading issues that you would experience on these things. But I'm very much, I like to play the original formats whenever I can. It's a personal preference. I just really enjoy doing that, and so this video is going to be mostly focused on that, but I'll throw in some other little tips and tricks you can do with modding throughout. So, starting off with the different variants of the Neo Geo CD. There are three main different variants of the Neo Geo CD. You have the first edition, which came out in Japan only, and this is the Neo Geo CD front-loading system. As you can see, it's a hefty boy. Looks like a giant VCR, almost akin to the original Xbox One. And I love this thing. This thing it's huge, and it's kind of cool looking. And I love front-loading, just front-loading systems. I think they're so cool. And this guy was only released in Japan. a very, very small run. So this is by far, I believe it is the rarest variant of the Neo Geo CD system. They're also known for being very unreliable. They tend to break very easily, as a lot of these front-loading systems do. The Sega CD Model 1 was also known to have this problem, and this is the box that it came in. As you can see, it's huge. Everything about this system is huge. So, didn't sell extremely well because, you know, it's big, it's clunky. The loading times are really, really bad. And yeah, however, it did, you know, bring the cartridge-based system to the CD format, and it is a Neo Geo at the end of the day, just with some loading times. And so after this, they released the top loading model, the first generation of the top loading model, which is the Neo Geo CD, and this one is the one that most people are familiar with. I don't have it right here, but this one was released in the United States as well, Japan, and I think some other countries, and basically it's just a more refined version of the Model 1. It has the same load times, however the build quality is significantly better. These things tend to be built like tanks. They're very well built, and they were much cheaper to produce than the original Model 1, which is another reason why they cut production short, just because it was so expensive with that front-loading disc tray system. And if money is very much an issue, I would recommend that you get the top loading model. However, my mentality with the Neo Geo CD is spend more upfront so you can spend less later. It's a slightly different mentality than the Neo Geo AES, which is spend less upfront, spend much more later. And the reason I say that is because of this next system right here. This is the Neo Geo CDZ. This was exclusively released in Japan. These are also relatively hard to come by, and they are on par to be the most expensive Neo Geo CD alongside a working Model 1. The Model 1s are expensive just because there were so few made and it's so hard to find one in original working order. The Neo Geo CDZ is expensive because also hard to come by, only released in Japan, and it is the superior Neo Geo CD platform. So here's the box for the Neo Geo CDZ. As you can see, it's much smaller. It's all black and white. There was a lot less money put into this. And the Neo Geo CDZ basically cut loading times in half. And that was a game changer in so many ways. Unfortunately, it was just too little too late. And so this was cut short because they weren't making money off of the Neo Geo CD platform, unfortunately. But this is a very well-built system. It looks really cool. It's top loading as well. You got the power button right there. You got your two controller ports up front, and you have S-Video, AV out, and composite on the back. And by far the best Neo Geo CD console. And this, my mentality with spend more upfront, spend less later, is primarily because you're spending about $150 or so more in comparison to the top loading Neo Geo CD model that was released everywhere. However, I mean, you're saving so much time with loading. It cuts it in half, and a nice thing about the Neo Geo CD consoles is they are region free, so you can play American United States releases on the Neo Geo CDZ on the Japanese console, and vice versa. On the top loading American United States model, you can play Japanese games on that. The only thing is that if you have a Japan console and you put in a United States copy of a game, it will load the Japanese version of the game. So it'll be in Japanese, and vice versa. If you put a Japanese game inside of a United States console, it will play that in English if it's on the list of games that were released in both countries. And there is a way around that. So a way around that is actually by modding your Neo Geo CD with a Universe BIOS CD chip. And basically what this does is you put this in, and it basically makes it so you can change the region of your console. So if you have a Japanese console, you can make it think that it is a United States console, United States console basically. And so that is one way that you can go about doing that. You have to have some soldering skills, not my cup of tea, but regardless, yes, so the Neo Geo CDZ is by far, I think it's worth the extra cost of admittance. It is known, I should say, to have overheating issues since the ventilation is not very good on this system. You have a couple slits right here, and you have some on the bottom, but they're all covered by the heat shield. So the ventilation isn't great. I've had this for over a year and a half, about a year and a half. I've played it extensively. I just put it on a hard surface and I have no issues with that. So the nice thing about these consoles being region free is that you really don't have to worry about which region you get your console from if you take the necessary steps to make sure the voltage and all of that is correct. And basically, the Japanese systems run on a different voltage than the United States, like standard voltage system. So I use a step-down converter, which brings the United States voltage down to what these Japanese consoles would take. And by doing so, just prevents any fear of overheating, because they still will work if you plug it into just a regular United States outlet, but you do run the risk of them running hot or overheating. So it's just best not to take a chance with that, especially since these things are so expensive nowadays. And another very important thing is you want to make sure that when you buy these systems that they come with their original power brick, because they have a proprietary power plug. This is the Model 1, and the Model Z here has a different one than the Model 1, so they're not interchangeable. And just finding these can be a real pain in the butt. And once again, using a third-party power supply, you just run the risk of things going wrong, since quality is not up to the standards as it was back in the day when SNK put these out. And so that's a very, very important thing, and something that I made sure to do when I was buying these systems. And finally, really, if you're going to go the top loader route and you're from the United States, the difference in price between a top loader from the United States and Japan is really not any difference. So I really wouldn't matter which one you get. I'd even probably say just to get the United States version so you can avoid the step down converting and all of that. However, if you want to go the route that I think you should perhaps venture down and get a Neo Geo CDZ, then obviously you have to get the Japanese version. And so in conclusion to that, if you're just looking the top loader route, get the American version, save yourself some hassle. But if you want the ultimate playing CD experience, then get the Neo Geo CDZ. Now, going on to the controllers, there were a couple of different controllers that were released for these systems. Model 1 it was almost like a jelly bean type shape arcade stick that was similar, basically just a cheaper version of the arcade stick that came with the cartridge-based AES. I don't have this. I've heard good things about this. However, what really makes the Neo Geo CD console shine are the controllers that came with it. The small controllers that came with it, and that's this guy right here. This is the Neo Geo standard CD controller, and it's got that clicky joystick, and then you got your 4 buttons, and then start and select in the middle. It's super comfortable to hold. These little guys go for around 50 to 70 bucks a pop. So it's nice to make sure that your system comes with at least one of these. However, recently 8BitDo actually came out with some wireless versions of these controllers, which feel incredibly similar to the original. The only thing is that the joystick feels maybe a little less clicky, However, these are great, and you can actually get some, I believe you can get some wireless adapters for the Neo Geo CD and have this wirelessly connect to that. I do not have that adapter, however, I have seen it. I use mine actually to play some Game Boy games on my analog pocket. So yeah, this is also another option that you can go down as well. These are about $20 to $30 or so. So much cheaper than the original. And another thing about the original is that the cords for these things are extremely short. Not long at all. And something that I do to kind of remedy this is I bought an extension cable off of Amazon, and I think it was like $10 or something. And you just plug it in right there, and it adds an extra several feet of distance, and so I can play in my bed. I like to play with cables just because it gets rid of some of that extra latency that you'd get if you played wirelessly. But this is my preferred way to play. Now, moving on to the games. So the whole concept of spend more on a better system that gives you a better overall experience, that means you get to spend less on the games. And the games are definitely one of the strong suits of the Neo Geo CD. Something to take note of is that the earlier Neo Geo CD games, they tended to be less demanding on storage, so they weren't as big of games, and because of this, loading times were naturally shorter. So if you have a top loading system, the loading times really are not super crazy, even though it's the slower loading of the two compared to the Neo Geo CD-Z. If you have a Neo Geo CD-Z, then they're almost instant, and it makes it really, really wonderful. However, as time progressed, we moved into the late 90s, early 2000s, the games became really, really big, and the loading times became unbearable. Even on the Neo Geo CD-Z, I mean, you have some games that take 20 plus 30 seconds to load, and it's horrible. And then compare that to the original top-loading Neo Geo CD, you're looking at a minute plus. Like, it's just insane. And you know, you pop in the game, it takes 15-20 seconds to load the title screen. You press start, and then it loads for another 20 plus seconds, and then it goes to the character select, and you pick your character. Then it loads for 20-30 seconds. It loads the opening scene of the fight, and then it has to load again. Like, it's actually unbearable. So I would stay away, even if you have the Neo Geo CD-Z, from some of those really later, late Neo Geo CD games. They're also incredibly expensive too, because they didn't make anywhere near as much. However, the games I'm going to be focusing on here are some of the earlier titles up through the mid to late 90s. So a common misconception is that you can only find fighting games for cheap on the system, and I would say that's mostly true, but it's not completely true. By far the cheapest games that you find on this system will be fighting games. However, you can, if you look hard enough, you can find some non-fighting games for relatively affordable prices, and much more affordable than what you would be paying on the AES cartridge-based system. So for example, you have Baseball Stars 2 here, which is an amazing arcade sport game. I paid $50 for this. Now you do have to look a little bit harder and a little bit longer, just because Neo Geo CD games tend, at least from my experience, don't tend to pop up on eBay and places as much as the AES cartridge versions of games. And so because of that, I don't pick up Neo Geo CD games too often. However, when you do find them, they're almost always cheaper than the cartridge-based version. But yeah, this is one example of a cheap non-fighting game for the system. And then a shooter. This is an isometric shooter called Viewpoint, and it's a fun little game. I also paid about $40-50 for this. Again, it took a long time to find. However, you can, if you just look hard and long enough. And another thing you'll notice is all of my games here are Japanese versions of the games. So as I said earlier, the system is region free, so you can play Japanese games on a Japanese system, obviously, but you can also play it on an American system. By all means, the Japanese games are going to be way cheaper than the versions that came out in the United States. Those ones are almost always at least twice, 3 times, 4 times plus more expensive than the Japanese versions, just because the Neo Geo was significantly less popular here than it was in Japan. And another wonderful shooter, this is Sonic Wings 2. This is an incredible arcade shooter. I've had a lot of fun playing this. You can find this for, again, around $50 or so. $50 tends to be the sweet spot for a lot of Neo Geo CD games. There is a huge library that is available for around 50 bucks. This is an exclusive to Japan. This is, I cannot pronounce the name, but I will post the English name right there. This is an amazing fighting game that was only released in Japan, Far East of Eden. It's from the Far East of Eden series, which was an RPG, again, that was released only in Japan. It was never brought to the States, unfortunately. But this is a fighting game with all of the characters from that. Think Super Smash Brothers or something. And this is just a beautiful looking game. The art is fantastic, the gameplay is really fun. You find this for around $30 or so. This is a little more expensive. This is World Heroes. This is not as good as some of the other fighting games. However, it's still very good in its own right, and its historical impact on the fighting game industry is one to take note of as well. They did some unique things for the very first time in this game. But this is around the $60 plus, 60, 70, 80, maybe sometimes around $100 game, just because it's a little harder to find. But then you have games like Real Bout or The Art of Fighting, Real Bout, King of Fighters. These games are all like $20 and under a pop, and they're all great. If you didn't like fighting games before you got a Neo Geo, you will like them after you have a Neo Geo, because they are by far the most affordable games, and they make up like 80% of the library on the system. Here we go. One of my personal favorites, Samurai Spirits, also known as Samurai Showdown in the United States. This is my favorite version that I have so far. And you also have some relatively obscure ones. I don't know the name of this one, but this was also, again, around $30 or so. And then finally, you know, another just misconception is that anything cool on the Neo Geo, you know, outside of fighting games or just anything unique, costs boatloads of cash. That is not true. This is the collector's edition for Art of Fighting, I believe 3. Again, the Japanese copy. And this is such a cool little collector's piece. And it's really cool knowing that the Neo Geo CD actually had like collector's editions. It comes with Robert's coin, which is really fun. And then it comes with some stickers and postcards and stuff like that in a little mini art book. I have a video on my channel dedicated much more to this game and the history of it. I paid $40-50 for that. Maybe even a little bit less. It's just, again, these are so cheap compared to like the cartridge-based AES. You know, people don't necessarily realize how affordable the Neo Geo CD can be outside of a lot of those heavy hitters that do cost hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. And I'll be honest, the loading times really have not been an issue for me at all. I do notice them, but they're really not that bad, especially on the Neo Geo CD-Z and playing some of these older games. So that's really all I wanted to talk about for this video, and I hope I gave you just some insight and made the fog of Neo Geo just a little bit clear. You can't go wrong with the Neo Geo CD. Even the top loading system, if you get the top loader and you play some of these older release day games, or maybe games that came out within a couple years of the release, the loading times really are not going to be that dreadful. But again, I would suggest save up a little bit more, spend the extra $100, $150, get the CDZ, cut those loading times in half, and just have an overall much better experience. And of course, you can buy the top loading system and mod that to where it just reads games off of an SD card. It's very easy to do, and it's pretty cheap as well. That pretty much gets rid of all of the loading issues. So there are so many different options for people to really delve into the world of Neo Geo, and it's a lot more accessible than people think. If you can read Japanese, all the better. You know, the Neo Geo CD actually had an exclusive RPG that was released only in Japan. Unfortunately, it is all in Japanese, and it is the only RPG on the system. But you know, just it's a great system. The games look great, they sound great, and they play great. And there's something really cool about playing, I guess, a game on original arcade hardware that doesn't take up 10 feet of your room. That's another reason why I wanted one of these things, because it is essentially an arcade in a box. That's what the original AES was marketed as, and this is the same thing, but in an even more compact case. And it's just really cool to think about. So that's it for today's video. Do you guys have any Neo Geo games, any Neo Geo consoles? Are you looking to get into Neo Geo? Let me know in the comments below. But thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.